A killer and a god. A killer leaves Egypt after killing someone and he heads for safety. He winds up on the east bank of the Gulf of Aqaba at a place called Midian. There he enters the property of the God of Israel and an angel appears to him in a burning bush. He is told to take his shoes off. He was walking on holy ground. Let's stop here for a second and reflect on these Bible writings. Remember this, angels came down from heaven and took earth women whom they chose as wives. Was that angel one of them? It has to be one of them, and he was associated with that God that had a residence there at Midian. The God then uses Moses the killer to go rescue the children of Abraham, because remember, that God promised to give the land of Canaan to the Israelites even though he had to kill thousands of men, women and babies to settle the Hebrews in the promised land. This God was supposed to be almighty. Why didn't he contact Moses before he got to Midian? And what the hell was a God that created the universe doing at Midian? I showed you the buildings and drinking holes at Midian in the next film. That God was the god Amun-Ra of Egypt, who became the God of Israel and had gotten too old to rule the people of Egypt, and the people wanted him to leave Egypt because he couldn't protect them anymore. He did leave Egypt but killed many people before leaving for Midian. So we bring to you the Egyptian story of the legend of the destruction of mankind. Chapter I. Here is the story of Ra, the god who was self-begotten and self-created, after he had assumed the sovereignty over men and women, and gods, and things, the one God. Now men and women were speaking words of complaint, saying, Behold, his majesty has grown old, and his bones have become like silver, and his members have turned into gold, and his hair is like unto real lapis lazuli. His majesty heard the words of complaint which men and women were uttering, and his majesty said to those who were in his train, Cry out, and bring to me my eye, and Shu, and Tefnut, and Seb, and Nut, and the father gods, and the mother gods who were with me, even when I was in Nu side by side with my God Nu. Let there be brought along with my eye his ministers, and let them be led to me here secretly, so that men and women may not perceive them coming here, and may not therefore take to flight with their hearts. You come with them to the great house, and let them declare their plans fully, for I will go from Nu into the place wherein I brought about my own existence, and let those gods be brought to me there. Now the gods were drawn up on each side of Ra, and they bowed down before his majesty until their heads touched the ground, and the maker of men and women, the king of those who have knowledge, spake his words in the presence of the father of the firstborn gods. And the gods spake in the presence of his majesty, saying, Speak to us, for we are listening to them. Then Ra spoke to Nu, saying, O you firstborn God from whom I came into being, O you gods of ancient time, my ancestors, you take heed to what men and women are doing, for behold, those who were created by my eye are uttering words of complaint against me. Tell me what you would do in the matter, and consider this thing for me, and seek out a plan for me, for I will not slay them until I have heard what you shall say to me concerning it. Then the majesty of Nu, to son Ra, spake, saying, You are the God who are greater than he who made you, you are the sovereign of those who were created with you, your throne is set, and the fear of you is great, let your eye go against those who have uttered blasphemies against you. And the majesty of Ra said, Behold, they have taken themselves to flight into the mountain lands, for their hearts are afraid because of the words which they have uttered. Then the gods spake in the presence of his majesty, saying, Let your eye go forth and let it destroy for you those who revile you with words of evil, for there is no eye whatsoever that can go before it and resist you and it when it journey in the form of Hathor. Thereupon this goddess went forth and slew the men and the women who were on the mountain. And the majesty of this god said, Come, come in peace, O Hathor, for the work is accomplished. Then this goddess said, You have made me to live, for when I gained the mastery over men and women it was sweet to my heart, and the majesty of Ra said, I myself will be master over them as king, and I will destroy them. And it came to pass that Sikhath of the offerings waded about in the night season in their blood, beginning at Suten-Henan. Then the majesty of Ra spoke saying, Cry out, and let there come to me swift and speedy messengers who shall be able to run like the wind. And straightway messengers of this kind were brought unto him. And the majesty of this god spoke saying, Let these messengers go to Abu, and bring to me mandrakes in great numbers, and when these mandrakes were brought to him the majesty of this god gave them to Sikhath, the goddess who dwelled in Anu, Heliopolis, to crush. And behold, when the maidservants were bruising the grain for making beer, these mandrakes were placed in the vessels which were to hold the beer, and some of the blood of the men and women who had been slain. Now they made 7,000 vessels of beer. Now when the majesty of Re, the king of the south and north, had come with the gods to look at the vessels of beer, and behold, the daylight had appeared after the slaughter of men and women by the goddess in their season as she sailed up the river, the majesty of Ra said, It is good, nevertheless I must protect men and women against her. And Ra said, Let them take up the vases and carry them to the place where the men and women were slaughtered by her. Then the majesty of the king of the south and north in the threefold beauty of the night caused to be poured out these vases of beer which make men to lie down, and the meadows of the four heavens were filled with beer by reason of the souls of the majesty of this god. And it came to pass that when this goddess arrived at the dawn of day, she found these flooded, and she was pleased thereat, and she drank, and her heart rejoiced, and she became drunk, and she gave no further attention to men and women. Then said the majesty of Ra to this goddess, Come in peace, O Umit, and thereupon beautiful women came into being in the city of Umit, or Amem. And the majesty of Ra spake concerning this goddess, saying, Let there be made for her vessels of the beer which produces sleep at every holy time and season of the year, and they shall be in number according to the number of my handmaidens, and from that early time until now men have been wont to make on the occasions of the festival of Hathor vessels of the beer which make them to sleep in number according to the number of the handmaidens of Ra. And the majesty of Ra spake unto this goddess, saying, I am smitten with the pain of the fire of sickness, when comes to me this pain? And the majesty of Ra said, I live, but my heart has become exceedingly weary with existence with them, i.e., with men. I have slain some of them, but there is a remnant of worthless ones, for the destruction which I brought among them was not as great as my power. Then the gods who were in his following said to him, Be not overcome by your inactivity, for your might is in proportion to your will. And the majesty of this god said to the majesty of Nu, My members are weak for the first time, I will not permit this to come upon me a second time. And the majesty of the god Nu said, O son Shu, you be the eye for your father. And Avenu him, and your goddess Nut, place him. And the goddess Nut said, How can this be then, O my father Nu? Hail, said Nut to the god Nu, and the goddess straightway became a cow, and she set the majesty of Ra upon her back. And when these things had been done, men and women saw the god Ra upon the back of the cow. Then these men and women said, Remain with us, and we will overthrow your enemies who speak words of blasphemy against you, and destroy them. Then his majesty Ra set out for the great house, and the gods who were in the train of Ra remained with them. During that time the earth was in darkness. And when the earth became light again and the morning had dawned, the men came forth with their bows and their weapons, and they set their arms in motion to shoot the enemies of Ra. Then said the majesty of this god, Your transgressions of violence are placed behind you, for the slaughtering of the enemies is above the slaughter, thus came into being the slaughter. And the majesty of this god said to Nut, I have placed myself upon my back in order to stretch myself out. What then is the meaning of this? It means that he united himself with Nut. Then said the majesty of this god, I am departing from them, and he must come after me who would see me, thus came into being. Then the majesty of this god looked forth from its interior, saying, Gather together men for me, and make ready for me an abode for multitudes, thus came into being. And his majesty said, Let a great field be produced, thereupon Seketh-hetep came into being. And the god said, I will gather herbs therein, thereupon Seketh-ero came into being. And the god said, I will make it to contain as dwellers things like stars of all sorts, thereupon the stars came into being. Then the goddess Nut trembled because of the height. And the majesty of Ra said, I decree that supports be to bear the goddess up, thereupon the props of heaven came into being. And the majesty of Ra said, O my son Shu, I pray you to set yourself under my daughter Nut, and you guard for me the supports of the millions which are there, and which live in darkness. You take the goddess upon your head, and you act as a nurse for her. Thereupon came into being the custom of a son nursing a daughter, and the custom of a father carrying a son upon his head. Notice this, the god was at Midian and the only people with him was his priest and his family. Without a military that god would not have survived, so what would he do? Let's find out. On to part 2.